going to ask each of our panelists, if we go for on our microphone, to take a few minutes first. I want to set the tone, and I want to have them share their story, because they're great stories to share, and then to see how did you get to where you are. There might be some folks in the audience who are not really quite thinking about doing something else in public office. They're already elected, or if they're not elected, they might be considering or thinking, and maybe you can share that push, que sí se puede, that look at me, look at everything that I accomplished after all the hard work that I put in. So we'll start with Lucy, perhaps, to share your story, 5 to 7 minutes. And then after that, once we get a feeling for where everybody's at, we'll come up with some interesting questions. And then you'll get to have lunch. So I'm gonna move on over to the living room. Girls, pretend we're in my house. There's glasses of wine everywhere, and we're just chilling. So really, I want you to be one with the audience and share your story. So I'm gonna move on over there and give it over to Lucy.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This is such a privilege to be here. And a round of applause to Luz. I love this woman. She is amazing. Definition of girl power, of supporting each other. She has been just a rock star and an advocate ever since I met her, and just a lovely person. So thank you, Luz.
Thank you.
So, yes, I will quickly tell you about myself. Fortunately, I've done this a couple times, so I can stay within the 7 minutes. I always promise myself, one of the very first political promises that I ever made was that my speeches would always be short and to the point. So I have actually maintained that promise all these years. So I always call myself an accidental politician. And the reason why I describe myself in that way is because there was never an indication that I would end up becoming the first Latina ever elected to the state legislature in the history of Nevada, representing the very district that I grew up in, which I'm very proud of, a practicing attorney sitting here with you today, being the Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor, the first, by the way, Hispanic male or female candidate for Lieutenant Governor ever in the history of Nevada. And the reason why there was nothing ever to lead anyone to believe that I would accomplish these things is because of my background. And incidentally also the very same reason why I decided to run for office in 2010, the reason that I am motivated every single day to be a public servant, why I decided to run for Lieutenant Governor. But it's because of my background. I experienced a lot of challenge in my state, in Nevada. I was growing up in Northeast Las Vegas in my district, and we had a lot of family challenges. When I was 9 years old, excuse me, when I was 9 years old, my mom left my family. There was a lot of us. I was actually the reason why we moved to Las Vegas, is because we experienced a family tragedy. My dad was a singer, and he was actually a very well-known singer back in the late 70s, and 2 of my brothers were murdered due to drug and gang violence in LA. And so my dad picked us all up and moved us to Las Vegas and tried to start a new life. Unfortunately, it didn't go that well for us. So when I was 9 years old, my mom left, and that left us really with no one. That left me with no one. My dad was literally working day and night to just keep us clothed and fed. And unfortunately, I fell through the cracks. And I fell through the cracks that very much still exist for people in Nevada, and most especially for Latinos, because I grew up in a very stereotypical way that Latinos, low-income Latinos, grow up in Nevada and across this country. And so I fell in with the wrong crowd. By 15 years old, I was on juvenile parole. By 17, I was a high school dropout. So there wasn't anything at all to indicate that I would be where I am today. And the reason why I am is because time and energy eventually was invested in me. And that was actually by my parole officer when I was 15 years old. And I always joke, I always tell people, always ask, do you still talk with her? And I say, actually, every so often I feel the need to check in. And I just call her. I say, by the way, I'm traveling out of state. But she's obviously very proud of me. But she was the first person who treated me like a kid with problems as opposed to another number that was just going through the system. It was the very first time that someone gave me something to aspire to, something different. No one in my family, I only had one older brother who'd graduated from high school. All of my sisters were teenage moms. One of my sisters was 14 when she got pregnant with twins. So those were the kinds of role models that were available to me, and so she was the first person to make me feel, to allow me to feel like there was some hope, like there was something else out there for me that I hadn't quite seen or experienced myself. And so it wasn't an overnight transition. I still dropped out of high school, unfortunately, to her dismay. But she was the first person to set me on that different path. And so eventually, through a series of more mentorship and role models, I ended up getting my GED, enrolling at my local community college, which, by the way, I grew up just several blocks away from and never knew it was a community college because no one at school, no one anywhere talked to me about college. And so I ended up enrolling there, transferred out to USC. So I'm a proud Trojan. Fight on. And went back to my community for law school. And I actually ran for office in my third year of law school, and I sat for and passed the bar during my first legislative session, and then began practicing thereafter. So here I am, 4 years later, now running for lieutenant governor. And it's been quite a ride. But, you know, in terms of obviously challenges, as Luz mentioned earlier, you know, I think that the reason why my story resonates with people is not because they can identify being in juvenile prison or, you know, doing all of the things that I was doing. It's because it's challenge and it's struggle, and we've all experienced it in our own ways. And certainly running for office, I was, you know, quite concerned, of course, you know, that those things would hurt me rather than help me, but I've always been very, very honest about my background and my experiences because they're my reality. And unfortunately, they're the reality of a lot of other young people and families across this country. And the best thing to do is to be honest about it and to work on addressing those problems that exist in our community, which again is what motivated me to run for office. So, you know, that's my story. It's what motivates me, and at the end of the day, I think that collectively, that's what we're all here to do, is to address those various challenges that exist for our families and for our kids, and truly to make this place a place of equal opportunity for everyone, regardless of where you come from.
Fantastic. Thank you. I don't get tired of hearing that story. You really are a motivator, and I'm sure you've taken on that role for others.
Absolutely.
Jennifer, how about you?
First, I want to thank everyone for having me here, especially Arturo. We've been working with NALEO. I've been working with NALEO for about 12 years now, and I really commend you for truly making your event bipartisan, so I thank you for that. My family came from Guadalajara, Jalisco as well, trekked across, very poor family. My grandfather went up to about 6th grade. My grandmother went to about 2nd grade in school, but they knew they wanted a better life. They had a very small place where they lived with dirt floors, and my grandfather would just go from job to job. And so he knew he was going to make the trek to Los Angeles for his family, and so they did, and it took many, many years to take my mom and the rest of her 7 brothers and sisters across. And he came through what most of you probably know as the Bracero program, and went back and forth for about 3 years, working in Los Angeles at odd jobs until he could finally bring the whole family over. And they were sponsored by a Navy admiral. And very obviously, my mom always tells me the story. She's 7 years old, and she sees the American flag here in San Diego, and was so proud to be here, and that she loved walking on the sidewalk because her shoes didn't get dirty because she was used to walking in the dirt all the time. And so just knowing that story and how patriotic she was about, so grateful to be in this country, I think that's where my love of this country comes from. And I didn't know anything about politics in high school. We didn't talk about it, but I was brought up pretty conservatively. And the one thing my parents knew was that I was going to go to college. They didn't know how I was going to get to college, but I was going to get there somehow. So my dad was always on me to get good grades, and to make, if I got an A-, why'd you get an A-? You need to get an A. B+, why didn't you get an A? And back then I didn't really appreciate it, but definitely did now, because I got an academic scholarship to Pepperdine University, the most beautiful campus in the world. Very hard to get straight A's at Pepperdine. But I went to Pepperdine, and because of my family, because they knew that I needed to go to college, first one in my family to do so. And I had a political science professor who was very active and made sure that we were doing well in our class and challenged us to go and volunteer on a campaign. I had never thought about doing something like that before. I was a journalism major and I thought I was going to write about politics. And so I went and volunteered on a campaign, and I saw how amazing it was and how one person can actually make a difference. When you go door to door and you do those phone banks, you move people to vote. And when you move people to vote, you can sway an election, especially this day and age with people winning elections by 2%, 3%. People win elections by just a couple hundred votes. So that was very powerful to me. So I changed over to political science fully, and I went to join the College Republicans. And it was 15 guys that were just sitting around talking about politics. And I thought, there's got to be more than this. So I joined a class that a Leadership Institute was putting on how to organize your group on campus. And so I did, and I took over the College Republicans, and to their dismay. And we grew, I grew our group to over 150 people, who then we went out and worked on state assembly races, state senate races, and really affected different races. And I thought, this is democracy, this is awesome, and I want more people to do this, because the government is in your life from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, so you can have a say in it, or you could stand back and let the government run your life. And I didn't want to do that. So straight from college, I went and worked on a congressional campaign and ran races, campaigns, state assembly, state senate, and congressional for about 10 years. And then I ran a race where got the attention of the White House and was asked to come and interview for a job to work for President Bush's re-election campaign. It was a very long process, pins and needles, 2 months, I'm going, am I going to get the job, going to get the job? Finally, I get a call 2 months later, and the political director says, this is, so-and-so. I'm not sure if you remember me. I said, yes, I remember you. I've been waiting for this call. And offered me the job. And I moved out to Washington, D.C., and it was probably the best experience of my whole life. I was given the responsibility of going into the Hispanic communities across the country, all over in New Mexico, Nevada, Texas, Florida, everywhere, and really get to be with the community and ask them about the issues that they care about and bring that to the president. And as you know, President Bush cared deeply about the Hispanic community, and we were able to get 44% of the Hispanic vote. Was then honored to go out and work at the White House for the president, which was amazing to me. Never, if you had asked me 10 years before you were going to be briefing the president on Hispanic issues, would I say that would be a possibility. And my proudest moment was being able to bring my family, my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, my husband, who is a Marine and just came back from Iraq, all into the White House to meet the president. And my mom almost, you know how we are, my mom's like, I don't know if I can go in there, I don't know if I can go in there, right? And I was like, Mom, I got this far, you've got to go into the Oval Office. She's like, okay, Mija, I'll do that. So she comes in, and she's, Mr. Presidente, and they start speaking Spanish to each other, and it was just such a great moment, because I was able to thank my parents in front of the president and say that they're the reasons why I'm here to work for you. And then, she walks out of the room when we're done, and she sits on the chair, she's like, oh my God, I did it. So, but that was a wonderful moment. And then afterwards, after the presidency ended, worked for Hispanic Leadership Network. It was an organization founded with Governor Bush to reach out to the Latino community on Hispanic conservative issues, and did that until after the 2012 campaign. And I got many phone calls to come and work at the Republican National Committee, which I was hesitant to do because I really liked my job. But I believe strongly that our community does much better when both parties are fighting for our votes. And so I took the plunge, and now my job is to completely ensure that I'm the deputy political director, so to completely ensure that our political plan is engaging with the Hispanic community at all levels with all elected officials across the country, and making sure that our elected officials understand the issues that affect the Hispanic community. And so that's my story.
Amazing, important work. And I love that you touched on the bipartisanship need as well. Catherine, we're on to you, and then we're going to get down and dirty.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Gracias. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and thank you so much as well to Arturo, who I have known since I was in college. We met when I was a college intern for the Hispanic Higher Education Initiative, and Arturo was working for MALDEF, and we've stayed in touch all those years. And so thanks to Rafael Magayan, who gave me the opportunity to work for the Hispanic Higher Education Initiative, and they were housed in the offices of the National Council of La Raza. And many of those friendships, those opportunities really have been just a foundation for a lot of work that I've done throughout all of my life. You know, when we're thinking about our stories, Helen knows I often like to frame what I talk about in acronyms to help me remember. So, so this morning's acronym, thinking about lunch, is PIE. So, and a piece of the American pie. So, standing for perspectives, initiatives and inclusion, and also excellence and education and experience. So in thinking about PIE, we've been talking about our perspectives, and I was thinking about my perspectives yesterday as they were talking about all the undocumented immigrant children who have now come to the United States. And I don't know how old my tata, my grandfather, was when he came to the United States from Irapuato, Guanajuato. But the story goes that, so my great-grandparents were debt peons working on a hacienda. So, so today we would call them farm workers, but also I think in English they call them tenant farmers who are greatly indebted. You get in these circles, you can never get out of debt. And the hacendado would always beat up on my great-grandfather. And then when that would happen, my great-grandfather would beat up on my great-grandmother, and then my grandfather would get a piece of that. And so one day, one of these beating up circles was going on. And my great-grandmother said to my tata, my grandfather, váyase de aquí y nunca regresa. No hay nada aquí, solamente pobreza. And he left. He walked. And he walked away from Irapuato, Guanajuato, in the middle of Mexico. And they say he spent time in the hills with the indios. We never found out what hills or what indios. But he became ultimately a curandero. He was a driver for the mines in Arizona, and he was also a bricklayer. And my nana, who was born in Bisbee, Arizona, she used to help to support the family by making tamales and pies, thus pie. So I realized, I don't know how old he was when he walked, but my grandfather was probably one of those teenagers who came over by himself. And it gives you a perspective when you think about policy. And when my parents met, my mother was working as a waitress, and my father was working for the Union Pacific Railroad, and there's a railroad station in Benson. She spilled coffee on his lap, an interesting way to meet someone. And they ended up getting married. And after she visited some of his family in California, said it was so beautiful, they moved to California. And when we first came to Los Angeles, we lived in a trailer park, in a mobile home. So when I was a young girl, we lived in a mobile home, and we have great pictures. My older sister lived in the mobile home for several years. I remember this one guy named Sam. He was an older man who lived in the trailer park. He was really very nice to us. And we have some great pictures of us and my sister Barbara, who was in the inaugural class of the Hispanic Leadership Institute. When she was born, we were still living in the trailer park. And then with 3 kids and 2 parents inside a trailer park, they finally decided we needed to move to an apartment. So we moved to the Barrio of East LA, where we got to move up to the Barrio. We got to live in an apartment. And so, you know, I think about, again, those perspectives and how they become tied to policy. You know, recently the PUC approved a pilot where PG&E is moving some of the mobile home park customers to be direct PG&E customers, because what happens still today in many mobile home parks is that the electricity is provided to a master meter that is controlled by the office, and then from the office there's a sub meter and basically sub lines that go to each trailer. Well, what happens is this also means that those people who live in the trailers, they are not electric utility customers. Okay, they get bills, but they're not utility customers, which means they are ineligible for our energy efficiency programs. Okay, if you've ever had the pleasure of living in a mobile home, you know that they are not the most energy efficient. Okay, so by making them electric utility customers, we now make them eligible for energy efficiency programs. We make them eligible for low income programs. We make them eligible for net energy metering and solar, right, where they've been cut out. And in addition to that, there's a huge problem with mobile home parks where because of this sub-metering of electricity, the electricity is often of substandard quality. So oftentimes they will prohibit things like having a microwave. You know, a microwave, I mean, it's something people take for granted. You can go to an A&P, right, and get a microwave, but it really makes things better for your life, right? Some places, there have been complaints about computers burning out, and it's because you often get this spiky power when you have this sub-metering. And I saw an example of that, again, when we talk about perspective, and this gets into initiative, when I had the great opportunity to work with the Yurok tribe. It's actually California's largest tribe. They're in far northern California in the Eureka area. And work with them on two initiatives. One, to bring electricity to the members of the tribe. They got electricity in June of 2013. And there's still a part of the tribe that doesn't have electricity. And they're California's largest tribe. There's over 5,000 of them. And they got telephone service in April of 2014. And this is an area that has no cell phone service, there's no cable service, they face the wrong side of the mountain, the trees are too tall, the big canyons are too big, so you can't do satellite. And so what happens is that up there, for example, I was able to visit with a family, the Tyners, who just got electricity last year, and they were saying how transformative it was for their life. And they had actually a computer that they were working to try to fix, because before they had electricity, they were on a small hydro system, which was provided by one of the tribal members, but it provided very spiky power. It had poor voltage control. And so what happened was it blew out the motherboard of the computer. These electronics often are very sensitive. And so this is an issue with computers, as microwaves just pull out a huge amount of power all at once. And so the spiky power of this water system blew out their computer. So I have a picture of the computer with its guts hanging out that they're working on. And now that they finally have electricity, they're able to have a computer for their two little kids who are in school. They have a microwave, they have a refrigerator, they have television. And now that they have a telephone, and we worked really hard because the PUC gave a grant to Verizon and PG&E in 2006 to provide electricity. They fully paid them in 2010. One of my predecessors did that before I was appointed. But yet, we're there in 2013, 2014 saying, where's the performance? You've been paid, what's going on? And finally we got also, and this is also about partnerships, we got a number of people in the PUC very involved with this issue and very concerned, and the head of the communications division, Ryan Doolin, wrote a letter to Verizon saying, we're very concerned about this situation. You know, we need you to perform. These people can't, there's no cell service in the area. They need to be able to make a call. This is a safety emergency. And so things still were not moving. And when I talked to Verizon, they said the problem is PG&E. PG&E needs to do something electrically. Now that they have electricity, they need to do something electrically to be able to have us energize our telephone system. So, you know, I was like, please work it out with PG&E. Let us know if we can help, because we regulate both, right? And so things still weren't moving. So finally I said, look, I am going up there to the Yurok Reservation on May 3rd, and I look forward to calling you, Tim McCallion, from the Yurok Reservation. So please let us know what we need to do to make it happen. So suddenly Tim called the CEO of PG&E, Tony Early, and said, Commissioner Sandoval's going up there, and she expects to call me, and I need your help to make this thing happen so that she can call me. So suddenly trucks rolled, suddenly the electricity was fixed, and suddenly the telephones were energized. And so when I got up there on May 3rd and had the opportunity to visit with this family, they got electricity for the first time last year, got telephone service just a few weeks before I came because I was willing to be a pain and complain, and got also other people to complain, and got also Verizon to help figure out how we could make this happen and to overcome the roadblocks. what I didn't expect was in talking with them, I knew this would be revolutionary for their lives, but two stories really hit it home. So Mr. Tyner was saying that last year when he was working on his house, he fell off his roof and he broke his hip and he cut himself. And luckily his wife was home, and luckily they had a truck that had gas in it, and so they had to call 911 because he knew he was hurt really bad. But there's no cell phone service. They didn't have a telephone. There's no way to call emergency. So she had to push him in the truck with a broken hip. Then they had to drive for 45 minutes to a place called Happy Camp, which was the first place they could get a cell phone signal, and then wait for 45 minutes for the ambulance. He's lucky he didn't die. So he said that now, since he had a telephone, he was able to, he already had to make a 911 call to report a brush fire, but because he had a telephone, he stopped a brush fire from becoming a wildfire. And his dad also lives with them, so his dad wouldn't move up with them until they had electricity. But he was, and it was. Well, in addition, because his dad is totally blind. And so it was also hard for him as a totally blind person to be there without the services when they didn't have communications. And anytime he needed social services, they had to drive to Eureka. They had to drive really far. But now that he has a telephone, his dad uses the telephone every day to call a service called Tell Me that reads him the news. So we brought the news to a blind man. I'll stop there.
Let me interject because I see that you're getting emotional. And this is just one of so many great stories of the work that your agency is able to accomplish. Even in this day and age, folks, and we've had some great sessions regarding accessibility just to the internet, let alone a telephone. Can you even picture that that's not happening in today? So you're a champion for that family and for those folks. We have great champions in every work that you guys do, but we got to where we are because someone helped. I love that you brought up the fact that it was a parole officer. Even if it's a parole officer, it's okay. I had my mom, and I always tell my kids, everything I do to make my mom proud. I live to just make my mom proud. But I didn't really have a mentor, let alone a Latina mentor. I've met some fantastic people after I got elected to office in 2005. But who held my hand and told me, you should do this? Who really guided me? Not really anyone. Definitely not a Latina. I've had a few great men who've helped, starting with the former DC director of NALEO, William Ramos, who was my high school counselor back when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, great friend, now appointed by President Obama to be Director of Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Commerce, another great Latino power in the House. So I want to know from you girls, one, who was your mentor if you even had one, and how sad if you didn't? And two, what are you doing? What are you doing to ensure that? Because I've taken that responsibility so seriously because I look at where I am today and damn it, I'm proud. I am very proud. But I want to make sure that somebody else is really, really proud. So not just my daughter, I've adopted her friends. I speak wherever I'm invited to speak. If it's a girls group, I am there 100%. I don't care what I'm doing. Everything gets canceled on the calendar. I've adopted many kids. I have a lady in my city of Aventura. I'm termed out now in November. I believe in term limits. And I found a fantastic Latina girl, young up-and-comer, to run for that seat. And I am pushing her and I am supporting her. So that's just some of the things I take full responsibility. I think it's like I have to do something to make sure that our numbers continue to grow, that we're not that 1%. What are you girls doing specifically, or are you aware of anything in your community that you can do to elevate others to join you on your post? Whoever wants to go first. And whoever's running this little timer, 4 minutes and 36 seconds, you can turn that off.
Well, I'm happy to start. Well, I mean, obviously everything that you just said, I do as well. I think it's so critically important just to be out there, especially for our young ladies. It's really hard to aspire to something that you've never seen. And so just by being present, just by having more Latinas in politics, you are already making a difference for so many. And so I participate as often as I can in speaking with youth groups, It doesn't matter if there's 10 of them or 1,000 of them. I do that as often as I possibly can. But I think that the two major struggles, and as far as mentorship, I guess I was probably in that group with it's so sad that you didn't have anyone. I didn't have anyone really. I was feet to the fire for the most part. I did later on have a Greek man who really took on that role as for political mentorship right about the time that I was getting close to my first election. So, fairly early, but still fairly late in the game in terms of actually being interested in getting into politics. And so in terms of, the mentorship and the obstacles that exist in order to increase Latina representation in elected office, I think it's two major things. It's access to mentorship and it's access to capital. We mentioned earlier about small businesses and their challenge in access to capital, but at the end of the day, for so many of us, it's not natural to, hang out with CEOs of companies and the wealthiest of the wealthy and, to really facilitate that political giving spirit that, quite frankly, is not that present in the Latino community. And if that is the bulk of your network, then it's very, very hard. So, in terms of addressing those challenges for mentorship and access to capital, I think it's critically important to support the organizations that are there to provide that for us. Whether it's recently with Latinas Represent, which has been a fantastic initiative that is highlighting the lack of Latina representation across this country at all levels of government, or of course Emily's List, which supports all women in office, running for office, both with mentorship training and, obviously we've been talking about HOPE and how they've been making changes here in California, but I think it's critically important to have that structure there for us, the structure of network, of mentorship, and oftentimes it's just, sometimes you just want to call someone and cry, we're so often as women, we're not allowed to do that in public. Boehner can do it every day and he's okay, but Lord forbid you cry, So sometimes you just want to call someone and say, oh my gosh, can you believe this happened to me today? So it's just incredibly important to support organizations that provide those two things, mentorship and then access to that giving community that, has just not been fully developed within the Latino community.
This isn't wine. What is this? This is water. Let me segue a bit because you touched on a good thing. I think it's an important question to have on the accessibility, availability. We're the matriarchs. Latinas we're the moms. We do everything. Whether you have children, you don't have children, you have a responsibility to take care of things in the house. I think Obama recently in one of his speeches said something about when a man shows up to work and says he has to leave work early because he has to take his son to a game or a doctor or whatever, everybody goes, ay, que cute. What a good dad. He's got to go do something. When a woman says it, it's often viewed instead in corporate America as a hindrance. Again, you have another appointment to go to. And, there's some of the challenges that we face in elected office, even things that we have to do. So I'm very curious to see how you manage that challenge. We all wear many hats, and we all have families and things we have to do. So aside from the mentoring challenges that we're finding, but you hit it on the nail, supporting those organizations is fantastic. Latinas Represent there's also Ruth's List on top of Emily's List. What are your challenges? How do you deal with that? How do you juggle it all?
Well, I want
Jennifer.
to just touch a little bit on the mentor because
Yes,
I also was
please,
in that. I didn't have a mentor. My mom and my dad, I give them all the credit for raising me the right way to at least put me on the right path. But even filling out the college entrance exams was really tough because they couldn't really help me. And I didn't have anybody who could help me. But I stumbled my way through it. But I do see a lot of my colleagues who did have a mentor and how fast they were able to, go up the ladder and just be exposed to a lot more things. So for about 10 years, I just kind of, struggled up that ladder myself and trying to push people, out of the way. It's just, okay, can I do this? I always remember this woman, though, in an assembly office that I worked with, because most of the time I'm with like 50-year-old men, right? And of course I look younger than I am also, so that doesn't help. So she goes, you just got to go in there and you just got to pretend like you're one of them. You talk like them, and you pretend like there's nothing different. And I started doing that, and it did absolutely make a difference. But it wasn't until about 10 years into my career that I finally started to get mentors, and boy, did that help me. And some of them are in the room today. Mario Rodriguez from the Hispanic 100, I think he's here somewhere, but he runs the Hispanic 100. They have a mentoring program, and because we work together, I was able to hire some of the people that he's mentoring in the Hispanic Leadership Network in Washington, D.C., and really, so we're both working on that. And then we have Rudy Becerra from Coca-Cola, who I met during the Bush years as well, who mentored me through. And that really, when you're in the White House, you need a lot of help and a lot of mentoring. And then one more person, we have Ruben Morales here, who has an organization called Grow Elect, who definitely, they focus on making sure that we have more Hispanics that run for office, and they help them run for office. So we have a lot of really great groups, and everybody that I just mentioned is in California, except for Rudy in Georgia. So, that helped me. But one of the things when I was at the White House, we would have groups of Latinas come in, youth, and they were asking for help, and I thought, wow, and they were looking up to me, and I was like, what are you talking about? Why are you looking up to me? You realize becomes a responsibility as you get to that, to a certain level. And so now I go and speak to as many of the youth group, and one of the things I found that we had in common was, and this was the challenge with our community, was my grandmother first of all, she discouraged my mother from going to college because they had to work. We had to work and help the family. And when I got a scholarship to go to DC, she goes, oh, you're gonna let her go by herself? How dare you do that? And so that was the challenge within my family. When I shared it with other Latinas, they were, 10 years, 15 years younger, they were still also experiencing that. So what I do is go to as many of the groups that I get invited to speak, and anybody who asks me, I tell them, don't be afraid of me. You call me, you email me, I will help you. I will try to give you any advice that you need. And I'm very proud to say that in my new job, what I've been doing is recruiting and training Latinas and Latinos to be on our staff, and half of my staff is Latina, so I'm very proud of that. Yeah.
Mentors and challenges.
And mentors, so I wanted to, a couple of people come to mind I particularly want to recognize and thank. So first, Maria Contreras Sweet. I had the opportunity to be her Undersecretary of the State of California's Business Transportation Housing Agency, and prior to that, her staff director. And when she said that she was the head of a very big agency, at BTH we supervised 42,000 employees. There were over 18 different departments, and then the governor asked her to do many special challenges and projects. When I joined to work with Maria, it was during California's energy crisis when we were experiencing the blackouts. And I asked if I could advise her on her work, and when she was a member of the California Independent System Operator Board, which ran the electricity grid. So it was a really challenging and important time. And also I learned a lot from Maria as she asked questions at a really difficult time. This was before Enron shenanigans were discovered. We knew that there were blackouts, and I remember going with her to businesses in the Silicon Valley who were saying, normally we'd love to talk about, BTH and what we can do, but we're so concerned about energy, because they said what happened was they were still making chips at this one place in the Silicon Valley, and they said when the blackout happened the first time, the first thing they did was get their people out of the elevator that was stuck because of the blackout. But then they had very finely tuned equipment they had to recalibrate for 2 days. So there was all this business interruption, and they lost all those chips. The second time it happened, they started thinking about moving to Texas. And what we heard from a lot of businesses was how important reliability was. And I helped Maria ask some of the questions and help some of our colleagues like Tal Finney ask some of the questions that eventually led to uncovering what was the market manipulation. And when I had the opportunity to be interviewed by Governor Brown, I told him about some of the stories that I learned from that time, that what I saw was not only people who actually had an interest in the system that had been created, sometimes a financial interest because they were aligned with interests that were actually benefiting from some of these high prices that were created, but also, oddly enough, people who had no financial interest, but it helped to create this system, and were so attached to the system that they created that they couldn't even look at it and examine it critically and let it go, even in the face of blackouts. So it was a really great perspective, and Maria gave me the opportunity to work with her, and then also years later, when I had the opportunity to be considered for the position of a commissioner of the CPUC, she made phone calls. She was one of the first people to say, I will talk to the governor, I will talk to Governor Brown, I will talk to Governor Davis, and her voice mattered as a businesswoman. So Maria, if you're still here, gracias, thank you. So, and one other person I'd like to mention, and this gets back to, you know, you've all talked about the turning points in your life in high school or in earlier. One person who was really there for me at a critical turning point, in addition to my family, was my mother was willing to let me go to a debate institute at USC. And I remember one of our neighbors was saying, you're letting her stay overnight, you know, and so at USC, we lived in Montebello by that point, it wasn't that far. But she was saying, well, she gets so tired and it's really intensive and it's a month long and it's a residential institute. Well, while I was there, I met a young man who was a student at Harvard. And he is now a professor at Stanford, Professor Douglas Bernheim. And he was the first Ivy Leaguer I ever met. So my mother was a high school dropout, later on went back and got her GED, and then later on went to East Los Angeles Community College through an equal opportunity program. My dad graduated from high school, did one semester at Pasadena Community College. I knew very early on that I wanted to be a lawyer. I saw lawyers on television, literally, and when I was a little kid, the civil rights movement was happening, and they were talking about changing the laws, and how changing the laws was increasing opportunities for minorities and women, and I said, that's what I want to do. So I announced that I wanted to be a lawyer, and I really thank my parents that they never said, oh, mijo, we don't know any lawyers, we don't have any lawyers in the family. They just said, okay, great. Had no idea how to do it, but then I got involved in speech and debate, and then I went to this debate institute, and then I was talking to Bert, and I was saying, well, you know, I've heard on the TV about Yale and Harvard and that they're great schools and I'm interested, but you know, there's only been one person in my high school who's gone to an Ivy League school. Most people from my high school, if they go to college, they go to a community college. My older sister went to community college. You know, but I really think I want to go to Yale or Harvard, and my grades, you know, say I'm in the ballpark, but everybody at my high school is telling me you'll never get in and you shouldn't go and you're not qualified. And he said something really important to me. He said, Kathy, I go to Harvard, and you're just as smart as the kids at Harvard. You belong at Harvard or Yale. You belong, so you apply. So I applied. And then I got in to Yale. And so I was very excited and just really proud to matriculate to Yale. But I remember after I got my acceptance to Yale, I told some of my teachers that I got accepted to Yale and I was going to Yale. And then one of my teachers, so Susanna is here, who's the superintendent of the Montebello Unified School District, so she knows this story, is I went to Shore High School in Montebello. More than one of my teachers said to me, wow, you're going so far away. Why don't you go to Cal State Long Beach instead? And I said, A, I didn't apply to Cal State Long Beach. B, I got into Yale. So, and I think, you know, because I was willing, you know, it was really when I called Bert, and I said, you know, back then you had to make long distance phone calls, and so my parents let me call him because he was the only Ivy Leaguer that we knew. You know, I had to introduce him to my parents, of course, so he was legitimate. And but I called and said, look, this is what they're telling me. And he's like, okay, the people asking you this question probably did not graduate from Harvard or Yale. You go to Yale. All right. So we made an appointment to meet at the Harvard-Yale game. But because I went to Yale, I also got to meet other people, such as the first Latina law student I ever met was a young woman by the name of Sonia Sotomayor. And I saw her, she had already graduated from Princeton, she was a third year at Yale, she knew she wanted to be a judge, And she was the first person to make me Puerto Rican food. She was very warm and inviting, and we shared a love of Nancy Drew and a desire to help the community, and knew that we wanted to be lawyers. And when I met Sonia, I knew I could do it. So gracias also, Justice Sotomayor.
You have some amazing mentors. Show off. So we cover the gamut. We go from no mentors to some really fantastic mentors. I'm going to try and stick and not keep you too late for lunch. But there was a very good quote by Tom Perez, our Secretary of Labor, who joined us yesterday. Everybody get to see the Secretary yesterday. He is a force. But he recently was at an event, and he said, are there fans of Modern Family, the TV show? You familiar with the TV show? And everybody's familiar with Leave It to Beaver, the TV show? So Tom said that we live in a modern family society, but we're still living by Leave It to Beaver rules. And that is very true. You don't have to applaud. I didn't say that. Tom said that. But it is very true still. So we can't have a conversation about Latinas in action without recognizing that fact. We've made great strides, but there's still some lingering Leave It to Beaver rules. I love that you said, Jennifer, that somebody told you gotta walk into the room and be one of the boys. My job that pays the bills, because everybody knows politics doesn't, I work in construction and big transportation construction company, and I have to hang with the boys all the time. And trust me, when you work in construction, boys, you're like, that's hardcore boys. But that's the truth for anyone in the audience, other girls, anybody in the audience here can recognize the fact. If you're not willing to have the drink after work, or maybe even learn to play golf, which I suck at, but I keep trying, you sometimes don't really make it. And because that's still a reality, we know that Tom Perez's quote is so real. We still have to prove ourselves, we still have to join the boys, but it's not about that. It's about really believing, through what you said, that you're one of the boys, that we're equal. So 30-second your elevator speech for great advice for the members of the audience on what to do, especially the boys, what to do to ensure to promote Latina power. Kathy, go.
Two things real quick. Teach your husband to cook. So my husband is very proud. He's up to like 6 dishes now. We actually fight over who gets to make the chorizo on Sundays. So I'm very proud of him. And then also the other thing is value your voice and don't let anybody take it away from you. I had a crazy experience on Tuesday where some people were visiting. We were at an en banc, and then I had to share a microphone with the man sitting next to me, and the panel was speaking, and then I raised my hand, was recognized by the moderator, who looked at me, pointed me, you're next. Okay, I moved the microphone toward me, turned it on, was waiting to speak. He grabbed the microphone and then turned it to him and just blurted and started speaking. So I looked at him, I thought, okay. Fine.
No, he didn't.
He's a guest. So he's a guest. I gave it to him one time, and so then the second time, the panelists are speaking. I raise my hand. The moderator looks at me, says, "You're next." I move the microphone, turn it on, and I'm about to speak, and he grabs the microphone again, and this time I said to him, "I'm next. Thank you." And he said, "I have something to say right on this point." And I said, "You think I don't?" And then I just smiled at him and took the microphone back. So don't let somebody steal your voice.
That's awesome. And that was just Tuesday. That wasn't like 30 years ago. Crazy. Lucy.
I mean, how do you top that? I think it's something similar. I think I always tell women, one, accept reality, but 2, absolutely never let it stop you, and then 3, continue moving forward to change that reality. Because essentially what it boils down to is that we do live in this modern family world with these Leave It to Beaver rules. And sometimes you just have to accept that it is what it is. But as demeaning and as sometimes spirit crushing that feels oftentimes, you cannot let that stop you. You have to move forward. You know, in politics, especially now running the statewide office, you know, the very first question that I'm asked after I announced is, why are you qualified to do this job? Despite the fact that I am one of the most effective legislators in Carson City when you look at my passage rate for the bills that I've introduced, under a Republican governor, mind you, I'm still asked that question, and yet, you know, my opponent, who literally has served one legislative session, has never been asked that question. It's just a basic assumption that you as a woman, you're not qualified, or, you know, that you have to prove yourself. You have to work, I always tell folks, you have to work 50 times more just to be considered average. And that is exhausting and sometimes depressing, but it's unfortunately the reality. And so you cannot let that stop you, and then you have to continue moving forward, because the only way that we're going to change that reality is when all of us succeed. When we continue having panels like this, to the point where we no longer need panels like this, because we have equal representation, and the Latinas are represented in the ways that not only they deserve, but that they should be represented.
Thank you, Lucy. And Jennifer, what's your pitch?
My pitch would be, have no fear. And if you have fear, hide it and embrace the terror. That's what I wrote that down during one campaign, because you experience a lot, and I think you can use that for almost anything that you face, whether you're going to be speaking in front of a crowd, you're going to be talking to some big CEO or donor. I wrote it, just embrace the terror. Anytime I was like, oh, I can't believe I have to do that, just do it. Just if you don't have, because there are some women who I just love, they have no fear, they just do it. I have some fear, so I hide it, and I just embrace the terror. And I tell those women that they can do it, and I would say that for us, if you are working your way up the ladder, make sure that you are helping someone come up the ladder with you, no matter what stage you're in. Even if you're in college, make sure you help that high school person.
Jennifer's like my soul sister. I swear, we must have like the same speaking cue cards.
Okay.
So
I just looked at your notes earlier, that's all.
embrace the fear. I love that. So everybody got their marching orders coming out today. Great political first, keep raising that ceiling and breaking the ceiling. I was the first Hispanic ever elected in the city of Aventura, which is a beautiful community in Miami-Dade County. Predominantly Jewish, Latinos didn't elect me. Today's day, I'm in office almost 9.5 years. There's no other Hispanic on the 7-member commission, and I want to change that. Once I step off, I don't want there not be a Hispanic on the commission, because we are 26% Latino in the city of Aventura. Also, for the equivalent of the CPUC in the state of Florida, the Public Service Commission, a gubernatorial appointment, and I would also be the first Latina if Governor Scott is wise enough to appoint me to something else in September. He appointed me to a transportation agency board, so I'm an elected official, I'm an appointed official, I have a real job that pays the bill, and I'm the proud mother of 3 children, and I do it all every day, and I wake up every morning with a smile, without fear, and there's almost every member of this audience that I think has that same very story, because here we are trying to learn things and better ourselves and meet the right people, and you hit it on the nail. While you're climbing up that ladder, professionally or politically, drag somebody with you. I have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 67 people at any given time that I'm dragging up with me. And that's your real marching order today. Thank BP, Felipe, your incredible team at BP for supporting this great session. We will continue to have this conversation, unfortunately, but I'm with you, Lucy. We'll take that challenge at NALEO to not need this session in the next few years at our conference. So thank you for coming. Lunch will be right here again. Now we all gotta get out so the staff can come in and set up for lunch. Thank you so much, and give me another great hand for our fantastic panel.